Edie Sinclair. David Luther.
Here.
Marianne Knowlton.
Here.
Robert Casillas. Hannah Scott.
Here by proxy.
Samuel Dalton.
Here.
Carla Sisk.
Present.
Terry Harper.
Present.
Ashley Sellers.
Gary Teal, present for Ashley Sellers.
Trip Bryant.
Here.
Leslie Thomas.
Here.
Stefan Broden.
I think I have a proxy. He told me this morning, but I'm not sure.
I got it. Thank you. Summer Wise.
Here.
Jack Barcroft.
Colton Buckley, proxy for Jack.
Linda Kenny.
Here.
Mark Dorazio.
Here.
Marion Stenko.
Present.
Michael Rain.
Present.
Morgan Graham.
Present.
James Zavalata.
Here.
Neva Haney.
She's here.
Bullard.
Here.
Barbara Carrasco. Mark Dunham.
Who?
Dion Starnes.
Here.
Britton Brooks.
Here.
Rhonda Lacey.
Present.
Tom Roller.
Here. Here.
Chairman Dickey, we have a quorum.
Excuse me, this is Barbara Cross. I couldn't unmute it, but I'm here.
Gotcha. Thank you. You can, if anybody may call and just text it.
Yeah, I apologize, Josh. I had to log out and log in. I'll be right back.
What was it? Yeah, they're taking roll?
Yes.
Okay.
That's muted, right?
No, that's unmuted or muted.
It says mute. This is Bob Kessick. Do I have an open mic? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Mike. Okay, I just want
You're live there.
I just want to make sure I was on the roll on the unmute problem. Kessick is here. Did you copy that?
Yes. I hear you, Texas.
Thank you.
Okay. No, it's still got me logged in as
Hello,
well.
this is Robert Casillas. I just want to make... Hello.
We can hear you, Robert.
There's 114 people. That's pretty good. See, I don't have to show the screen so they can see.
All right, let's see if this,
No,
okay,
I
for
don't- you
whatever
don't-
reason, it's not letting me switch back to my own identity, but that's okay. So we will stop the screen share, set it up. Okay. So, good evening, and thank you for being with us tonight for this emergency meeting of the State Republican Executive Committee. We expect the decorum in this meeting to be the same as it would in person. That is, we expect the best of ourselves and each other as representatives of our fellow Texas Republicans. If you would, again, everyone, please mute yourself if you are not currently addressing the body. Thanks. We have before us this evening the critical matter of our state convention. As I've said since the beginning of this pandemic, this is an unprecedented time and we face unprecedented challenges. Our state convention is set to begin its committee meetings on Monday, July 11th, with the first general session scheduled to convene 2 weeks from today on Thursday, July 16th. Our objective has always been to hold our state conventions in person, if at all possible, to best protect the rights of the delegates while also taking proactive measures to protect the health and safety of those delegates. No one expected our society to be upended as it has over the past 4 months. But every step of the way, we have responded with decisive and measured actions. It was a major accomplishment that we were able to move the dates of our state convention, plans for which began over 3 years ago, from its original date in May to our new set of dates in July that were far outside the CDC windows, with no loss of space to hold the convention and no additional cost to the delegates. We amended our RPT rules to provide the SREC with greater flexibility to adapt to the dynamics of the pandemic. We moved quickly to obtain waivers from the RNC to ensure protection of all of Texas's delegates and that all of them would be counted for President Trump. We held leadership calls to make sure our county and Senate district convention temporary chairmen were well informed and had the resources available to handle the fluid nature of scheduling and conducting their conventions. Our county chairs and temporary convention chairs rose to the challenge. They were vigilant and diligent in moving their county conventions from March 21st to a later date. We had over 280 conventions that were to be held across Texas on March 21st, just 8 days after the president's declaration. All of us working together smoothly moved our local conventions to later dates, which just concluded this past weekend on June 27th. Now, we must turn our attention to the important work of the state convention. Our convention process is crucial election activity. Not only do we set the rules, platform, and legislative priorities of our party and elect our party leadership, including each of us here today participating in this critical decision, we also elect the delegates to the national convention that will officially, legally, cast the nominating ballots for our party's nominees for president and vice president of the United States. Even more so, we will elect our party's presidential electors, the men and women who, after we deliver victory just 4 short months from tomorrow, will cast the actual votes for the re-election of President Donald J. Trump. Since the original declaration in March, and throughout this entire pandemic, we have continued to scrutinize the progress and the government orders issued by various government entities. We also know that we have to be in full compliance with our rules and procedure to protect the full rights of our delegates, no matter the course chosen. That is what we are doing tonight as we assess the path forward for our state convention. Weeks ago, I established a working group to assess how to bring meetings online and examine how balloting could still safely occur as the ultimate contingency plan. So that we were fully prepared for any turn of events, which includes government orders or internal decisions over the next 2 weeks, we contracted for a system and approach that can provide encrypted voting and credential verification. We have a path forward to holding an online convention should the need arise. It is and always has been a backup plan. We have said repeatedly that the rights, health, and safety of our delegates have always been our top priority. And that, of course, remains the case today. In the early days of restarting the Texas economy, we were optimistic that the worst days of the pandemic were behind us. Recent days, however, brought news of escalating numbers and growing concerns about large public gatherings. I called the officials meeting Tuesday and this meeting tonight in response to the concerns expressed by several of you in response to these trends about the ability to safely proceed with an in-person convention in Houston in mid-July. I and many of you have heard every day from numerous delegates with concerns both ways. Some are strongly encouraging us to press on with a convention with protections in place to ensure that our convention will be safer, much safer, than the 60,000 unmasked protesters who just 3 weeks ago took to the crowded streets of Houston. Some of our delegates have expressed their unwillingness to come to Harris County, and there are many opinions in between. Whatever their views, their voice is a vital part of this conversation, and I am glad that our delegates have had the opportunity to have their opinions included. As we have discussed, the landscape throughout this pandemic has been dynamic to say the least, and is no less so today. Late this afternoon, Governor Abbott issued Executive Order 29 requiring that face masks be worn while inside a commercial entity or other building or space open to the public. While there are exceptions, the orders will require convention attendees to wear face masks for the majority of the time, and when it is not feasible to maintain 6 feet of social distancing from another person. The agenda tonight calls for 2 items. First, state convention discussion, and second, revisiting the vote that set the location of the state convention. The first item on our agenda was intentionally drafted broadly to allow us the latitude we need to discuss a variety of options regarding the execution of the convention as the body here wishes. The second item is the mechanism that allows us to determine our next steps. Our first decision is about whether or not to voluntarily take our convention online. We have to settle that issue before we can move forward in evaluating the rules to guide us down that path. Because any change to the location of our convention and moving the convention online is a location change, any change will require significant evaluation of our rules and needed revisions. And because of that, I will call for another SREC meeting on Sunday with the appropriate rules changes noticed, depending on your direction tonight. Tonight's meeting is not about changing the rules. Tonight's meeting, as noticed, is about evaluating current conditions that could affect the location of the state convention or the conditions for the convention. So here are the parameters for tonight's meeting, just to be clear. We must tonight make a decision regarding the location of our convention before we can work on the logistical consequences and next steps of that decision. We will set the framework for doing so in the meeting call that will go out tomorrow for our next meeting on Sunday evening. In that changes in RPT rules that we need in order to meet the desired outcome. Regardless, given current recent trends, we need to implement a rule change to allow for our emergency fallback contingency plan if necessary. Okay. So with that, we will head on to agenda item number 1, which is state convention discussion The floor is open, and as usual, I will take people in the order of their hands raised. I am not sure who Wendy Seg is. Wendy, if you could unmute yourself and lower your hand and then address the body. Yeah,
That's you, podcasting.
pardon? Okay, well, while Wendy Seg figures out what's going on.
It's actually Bob Kessig, who is Wendy Seg.
Okay, Bob Kessig. Bob, you have your hand raised and you are now unmuted. Okay, we will move on to Mr. McCloskey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Oh, wait.
Mike-
Oh, yeah, he lowered his hand. There you go. Mr. McCloskey, please.
Yes, sir. Mike McCloskey, Senate District 5. First, I have a point of information. Is our legal counsel available to ask a question to? I would presume he would be the appropriate person.
I am available.
Yeah, he is available, but as we would do in an in-person meeting, ask your question and then I can yield the floor to the council or not, as case may be.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I would like to get a timeline of information as to the dates when we are required to have our National Convention delegates chosen and our electors chosen, because those are the two date-specific items that I see coming up in case we find ourselves at the last minute where we cannot hold an in-person convention. If he can advise us, or if you can advise us of that, so we have that information.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, if you would go ahead and drop your hand and go ahead and mute yourself. Your question was, what are the date restrictions around presidential electors and delegates? And the answer is, we have spoken to the RNC multiple times, as we have been doing all throughout this. And we've spoken to them again multiple times in the last 48 hours. And they must have all our information by July 20th, period. So, and as you all know, our convention is set to end on July 18th. So we will not have a lot of time, as we have not had throughout this whole thing. Thank you very much, Mr. McCloskey. If you'll go ahead, actually, here, I can lower your hand. There we go. Mr. Covey.
Yes, sir. David Covey, SD3. Mr. Chairman and members, I'd like to speak in favor of continuing on with an in-person convention. And today I do speak with a heavy heart. And the decision before us is a far-reaching and consequential decision. As was said only a few hours ago, Governor Abbott issued Executive Order 29 relating to the use of face coverings. This mandatory face covering order is a grave disappointment to myself and many in the grassroots who understand or believe that this is a legislative authority and that it takes away the discretionary power of local elected judges and mayors to do what is best for their constituents. Texas is a diverse state and it exists as a diverse entity. This blanket and unfunded mandate directly infringes on Texans' rights. In regards to the RPT state convention, this order changes a couple of things. It is apparent that face coverings will be mandatory. However, because the governor has himself mandated this behavior, it is no longer up to us to decide whether this is mandatory or not. We can't remove it, and it is mandatory. So let's let the burden to enforce this unfunded mandate and the responsibility and accountability fall squarely on those who have ordered it. To be clear, this has already been my personal practice to wear a face mask, but there is a huge difference between a voluntary face mask wearing and mandatory. Virtual meetings are and have been a lifesaver for so many of us and our families and businesses during this COVID situation. They have kept people connected at a time when connection is sorely needed due to the COVID pandemic. In fact, the SREC changed the rules previously, as you know, to allow SD and county conventions to perform virtual meetings to complete their conventions. However, to my understanding, no Senate district or county conventions took advantage of the virtual opportunity. And the reason is that Republicans overwhelmingly support the in-person experience and process of voting on our platform and our party leaders. There is a special energy and cooperation that occurs when Republicans are together in person, the kind of collaboration that fuels the grassroots and pushes our party on toward victory in November and keeping Texas red. We have nothing less than the re-election of President Donald Trump and the redistricting process that will shape the next decade of Texas politics on the line. The concerns with going virtual are several. First, it limits participation and dialogue. There's absolutely no way for 5,000 delegates to interact and participate or influence the process. The virtual meeting will always give more weight and influence to those appointed to committees and those chairing the committees, and it takes away the power from the people, especially and unfairly, of the rural counties and districts which I represent. Second, a virtual convention opens the door for statewide electronic voting. You can say that we have already opened that door by allowing SD and county conventions to use it, but thankfully none of them did. But there's no comparison between our SREC using a virtual meeting and having 64 of us on one Zoom call when you compare that to 31 Senate districts meeting with several hundred individuals twice during a convention and 36 congressional districts meeting with hundreds of delegates making complicated decisions, along with 5 standing committees that meet and the platform discussion with anywhere from 5 to 10,000 delegates trying to have their voices heard. There is no comparison, and this unfairly burdens rural counties. In addition, many of our rural delegates will be disenfranchised by the virtual process because they lack the internet bandwidth to maintain streamed videos for 3 days in a row. Many of us can barely stream a 2-hour Clint Eastwood Western, much less to keep a streaming process up for 2 days with participation and votes. I will admit that either way will disenfranchise from the process. But the difference is in person, every individual makes their own choice. But in the virtual sense, we as the SREC make the decision of who we disenfranchise. That is frankly dangerous, and it is always political. I'm almost through. Texas maintained our in-person convention process through World War II. We braved in-person conventions during the Great Depression and Reconstruction. We came together after our 9/11 terrorist attacks, despite the danger in the air. Texans have done what it takes over the years to preserve our right of assembly and free speech. We are irreversibly brave, loyal, and willing to sacrifice for our neighbors. So let's talk about that, sacrificing for our neighbors. There's a sentiment being floated that if we move forward, taking every precaution and safely allowing the convention to go forward, that for some reason we do not care about our neighbors. In other words, they would have you believe that no amount of safety, no amount of personal protective equipment or precautions is sufficient for this to move forward. And if we dare to assemble, we are horrible and uncaring people. That is because this is not about caring for our neighbors. This is about shutting down the most impactful political event in the largest state in the country.
Chairman.
Yeah.
JT was asking.
Sorry, excuse me for a second, Mr. Covey. Mr. Edwards, I presume you have a point of order. Okay, yes.
Yeah, I do.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to raise a point of order with regards to decorum. It appears that my good friend, Committeeman Covey, is reading from a script. Is that allowed?
It's certainly not disallowed, but actually since you did break in to give a point of order, actually this is a good time, and thank you, Mr. Covey, to remind everybody what we are actually looking for right now is motions on item number 1. So motions on item number 1, number 1 being changes we might or might not make to the management of a convention in Houston. Then the next item would be the decision of whether or not to change the location. But thank you for that, Mr. Covey.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
There is a motion that has been sent to you and Brandon, ready to be considered.
Well, actually, I wasn't aware that that was a motion. And you're, as any other member, you're welcome to bring up a motion when appropriate. So is it a motion that has to do with state convention that does not have to do with location? If it has anything to do with location, it goes in the next agenda item, which is all about the location.
Okay.
Point of information.
That's
Chairman?
both. I don't know how else to say it. It's in one motion.
Okay. So if it includes location, that would still be appropriate for the next section. Yes, Ms. Glover.
My understanding was that we were in discussion. Right
Well,
now.
it's called state convention discussion, but for the body to have a discussion, it needs a motion to discuss.
Okay, can I make a motion that we discuss?
Discuss what? What are you proposing we do about the state convention that would then be for the body to discuss the pros and cons of you suggesting?
Okay, so my understanding was that we were discussing whether to have the state convention in Houston as planned.
That's actually the second item on the agenda. The first item on the agenda is to discuss any changes. So, for example, if there were not already a mask order, would be a potential discussion would be whether or not to have a mask policy. So, or if you wanted to have a motion about something else that's allowed within the rules for a change of convention that is not the location, because we separately noticed revisiting the vote on location, that's next.
Point of information.
2 items tonight. One is any change to the convention, any change you want to propose to the convention that does not include changing location. And then the second is revisiting the vote we already did where you all called the location to be Houston.
Mr. Chairman, point of information.
Yes, ma'am.
In this discussion, I mean, this is the first time that I'm hearing about a possible alternate location. Could you explain that a little bit before we decide on locations? I didn't even know there was any other plans out there.
Well, as I said in the opening,
Okay.
online is a location. And
Okay.
it's different from meeting in Houston, right? So
Okay.
you all issued a call for everybody to meet in Houston. Any other location, including online, requires you all to change your vote for the call of the convention.
Thank you.
You bet.
Mr. Chairman?
Chairman,
Yes,
Mr.
Ms. Lacy.
um,
Oh,
this,
yeah, sorry, my apologies. Mr. West has patiently had his hand up for quite a while. Mr. West?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering if we could end this discussion on state convention. You mentioned Governor Abbott's order. Do you have a copy of that order that could be read or at least posted within that is the true order and not a one-off of the Texas Tribune or anything like that we may apply into this discussion as well?
Sorry, I spent the afternoon coming up to be with my friends and compatriots up here in Denton County, so I do not have a copy of that. Does anyone else?
I do have that. Text that to Brandon. It's in 2 parts.
Please posted it. Brandon, if you would email it out to the members.
It's in the chat box.
And then I do have
there we
a point
go.
of inquiry.
Warren put a link to the official document in the chat box in Zoom. So Mr. West and everybody else, you can just click on that and you can see it on your browser.
Chairman?
Thank you very
Actually,
much,
2
Mr.
documents.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. West, if you would go ahead and remove your hand. Mr. Dunning.
Dunning or
Thanks,
Dunham?
Mr. Chairman. I was
No,
trying to
Dunning.
get the mute done.
Yeah, Mr. Dunning, you have the floor.
Yes, I would like to make a motion regarding the conduct of the convention, that this body choose to have an in-person convention.
Okay, that actually,
Chris
that
McDonald,
is the current
second.
state. Sorry, hang on. That is that has to do with location, so that'd be next. So it's out of order right now.
Okay.
B, that is the current state. You can't, it is improper to make a motion to say, let's do the thing we're doing. So,
okay.
Thank you. Let's see, that was Mr. Dunning. Mr. McCloskey, you have something new?
No, I'm trying to take my hand down. I'm not.
Oh, okay, no worries.
I've got a motion.
There we go.
I
Lori.
have a point of inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, Rhonda Lacey, SD 31. In the proclamation, it does have a limit of 10, of a meeting of 10. So how is that going to affect us?
It does not. And actually for that, I will defer to the council. Mr. Council.
Okay.
Give a quick summary.
Hello, everyone. Wade Emmert here. So I have been dealing with Governor Abbott's orders for the last 4 months, and I will first say that they're not always a model of clarity. But this one is pretty clear, I think. I don't believe the 10-person limit applies to us. If you look at the order, the main thrust of the order is the first paragraph after the therefore clause. And it says, every person in Texas shall wear a face mask covering over the nose and mouth when inside a commercial entity or other building or space open to the public, or when in an outdoor public space, wherever it is not feasible to maintain 6 feet of social distancing from another person not in the same household. And then it goes on to list exceptions to that general rule. The only place it says 10 people is after those exceptions. And it says, it does not restate the rule. It simply says that a gathering of more than 10 people is not one of these exceptions. So I think as it's worded, the order requires gatherings of any size to wear face masks, provided it is not feasible to maintain the 6 feet of social distancing. So whether it's a group of 10 or a group of 9, you have to wear the face mask, provided it is not feasible, if it is not feasible to maintain that social distancing.
Great, thank you very much. Ms. Glover was next.
Yes, Chairman, I would like to make a motion that there are no changes to the meeting, no changes to the convention.
That's actually out of order. What you could do is call the question on this discussion.
Okay.
Then let's go to that. So yes. So
I've got a motion.
Motion to call the question, but not before recognizing the 3 people already had their hand up before you did that. If so, and the next in that call, I see Mr. Ramsey, but next in that list is Mr. Armstrong, and then Mr. Norwood, and then Mr. Ramsey. So you were the third, Mr. Ramsey.
Well, I think I'll wait for the discussion on part 2.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Norwood? Did you have a motion for a change to the convention that does not apply to location? Mr. Norwood? Okay.
Unmute.
Muted.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
There you go. Yes. All right. I move that all activities with regard to time-sensitive matters of the convention, such as nominations to the National Convention and the elector, be front-loaded to the beginning of the convention and then the convention be reconvened at a later date and place. And what I'm trying to do there is say, we're going to meet in Houston. We're going to make sure we don't lose our deposits. We're going to give an opportunity for all the people who do want to meet people, take care of the business we have to do and get done and get out. That way we don't have to have a big general session. We don't have to have a place where people are going to say, oh, look at all the Republican following Scott. And you get things taken care of. Oh, we have friends.
I'll
Anyway.
second that.
Second.
And so the
Second.
point there.
Point of order, sir.
Needs to go on mute.
So actually,
I already had a motion.
so yeah.
That would make it easy for you
So
logistically.
two things.
Yeah.
One, the order of business for the convention is the decision of the convention. That's literally the first order of business that they do. So
We can change
right
and we
after
can change.
affirming permanent convention chair. So so that's I'll consult with parliamentarian, but it is my expectation that that's out of order for right now. For this body, and Miss Glover, I appreciate your deal. Mr. Armstrong said he'd wait for the next one, with the assumption that that's out of the order for this body, and I'll confirm that. Mr. Ramsey, you've been very patiently waiting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. I think it would be in the interest of our delegates in supporting the safety of the city and the delegates that we should comply with the governor's request that we strongly encourage the use of masks and that we wear the mask when social distancing cannot be done. And therefore, I'm going to move that the SREC instructs the Temporary State Rules Committee to include appropriate supplemental rules to make wearing masks at our in-person convention consistent with the governor's executive order GA 29.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to make did you say the temporary rules?
Yes, the Temporary State Rules Committee I can send that to somebody if
Yeah, if you would send that to Brandon, if you would set that in a Google Doc and or paste it into chat for actually if it's short enough, Mr. Ramsey, if you'll just paste it into chat, that would be great.
Sure, I'll do that.
Okay, so we have a motion for Mr. Ramsey and a second.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Ms. Glover.
I had initially made a motion that there be no changes made to the convention.
Right. As I said to one of the gentlemen, a motion to not do anything is not an appropriate motion. What you would want to do if you want to do nothing is you'd vote against every motion to do something.
Okay, so we just need a little tweak. We need a little change. As with Mr. Ramsey's motion. Okay, all right, thank you.
You bet.
Point of order. Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
I thought there was already a motion on the floor by Mr. Norad and seconded. How do we accept another motion by Mr. Ramsey?
As I ruled it out of order. And so we moved on to the next one. So, yeah, again, the Temporary Rules Committee makes recommendations to the SREC. The SREC adopts the temporary rules of convention. So actually, let's Let's finish up the motion that's on the floor right now from Mr. Ramsey, and we'll come back to Mr. Nord.
Point
Mr.
of
Ramsey's
information.
motion is on the floor, so, and you can see it in the chat box. It is to move that the SREC instructs the temporary state rules committee to include appropriate supplemental rules to make wearing masks at our in-person convention consistent. So the motion's in order, even though what you'll be doing is instructing the temporary state rules committee, who will then turn around and provide them to the SREC to pass to start the convention with, and then that'll start the temporary rules of the committee.
Mr. Chairman, point of information.
Yes.
Can the SREC instruct the temporary rules committee to do anything? I mean, can they instruct? They can recommend, but can they instruct the temporary rules committee at all?
Recommend.
Yeah. So is that a motion to amend?
I make a motion, man, to say recommend instead of instruct.
A motion to amend the word instruct to recommend. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Or yeah. Okay, great. Any opposed, hit the no button in the participant thing, and I can see a count on the no. Okay, great. The amendment passes. So now we are on the motion as amended. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
May I make an amendment?
Oh, yes. But before you do, Mr. Branch, Mrs. Wright, Ms. Elliott, I am assuming, since your hands were up before this motion was made, that you're not actually speaking on the motion. So, yeah, that's fine. Mrs. Duncan, you have the floor for an amendment.
Yes, where I would like to amend it to say that those unable to wear masks must bring documentation from a physician.
Okay. Is there a second to
Second. Second.
Point of order.
Who's got the point of order?
Walter West, point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
You were asking someone to provide personal information that is medically necessary for them and them alone, that's protected by the HIPAA laws of the United States of America.
It's not.
That's not.
No, it's not.
On patient rights and confidentiality.
I can speak to my amendment and explain it.
Look, I have a medical condition. I will not be wearing a mask, but I don't feel that I need to go into detail what my medical condition is. That's my patient rights of confidentiality between me and my doctor, period.
Mr. Chairman, may I speak to my amendment?
Yeah. So first of all, order everybody, and please do keep yourself muted if you're not addressing the body. And yes, Mrs. Duncan, you may speak to your amendment.
Yes, the reason I bring this up, and this is not a confidentiality and it's not a HIPAA requirement. I do have a medical problem, and I think most people on here who know me understand my medical problem of why I have a problem with a mask. I do carry a letter from my doctor so that I can go to places like H-E-B and Walgreens and all the places here in Austin that require masks. And all it says is that I have a medical condition that allows me to go unmasked. It doesn't say what the condition is. It just says a medical condition. And my doctor wrote that up on his letterhead. It's not a problem. I go to H-E-B when they get on to me. I just pull that out and they're like, oh, that's good. We're good. So it's not a HIPAA problem. It's not giving out special information. It just says I have a problem. Thank you.
Ma'am, any further discussion on the amendment?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Tanya Robertson, SD11. Right now, a lot of doctors aren't seeing patients because their practices are either under regulatory restraints or they're just not able to. So that would, in my opinion, that would prevent people from adhering to this mandate. And I completely disagree with it. I too have an issue, a medical issue with wearing a mask from a previous neck surgery. And my surgeon is not going to see me to write a letter to not wear a mask. So I'm against the amendment.
Understood. Thank you. Any further discussion for or against the amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Branch SD 8. I did want to bring up, this is, I think it creates a huge conflict when you have others who have to go out and start policing other people's activities. I think that we live on an honor system, and to create some type of a conflict at the convention would create only more problems for the convention itself. And so I believe that we need to stick with that honor system, and if people aren't going to wear a mask, not to go through the enforcement of it. So I'm going to vote no for this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Branch. I assume you still have a separate motion that you'd like to talk about, so I'm going to leave your hand up. But I am going to go down real quick down in order of the hands raised. Mrs. Wright, do you have anything to address this motion, this amendment?
Not this amendment, thank you.
You bet. Ms. Elliott, anything about this amendment?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Bryant, or did we already get you covered?
Yeah, I think I covered it pretty well. My doctor, my primary care physician will not see me at this current time. They're recommending all their patients to go to the ER.
Understood.
That's not going to cut it.
Thank you. Mr. West, did you have something fresh or? No, Mr. Rain.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. And I removed my hand. So I'd like to speak against this motion, as I have just contacted my doctor. I can't get in until 3 days after the convention. Unfortunately, Obamacare killed my doctor, so I couldn't keep the one that I had that would make that amendment for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems to me that we're kind of putting the cart before the horse here. We're talking about process, procedure, and rules when we haven't decided whether or not we are going to have a live or a virtual or a hybrid convention. And for that reason, I would be opposed to this particular motion at this time. But in addition, and correct me if I'm wrong, if it's out of order, I understand. I'd like to keep my hand raised to make the motion at the appropriate time. But I would move to table this discussion and this motion until we have decided whether or not we are going to have a convention in Houston.
I would second that.
SREC second.
So actually, if that's what you'd like to do, then actually you'll vote for Ms. Glover's call of the question. We would then move on to the next item in the agenda. But to be clear, you've already called the meeting for Houston. As it stands now, we are going to have a live in-person convention in Houston. That has always been the plan. That is the current state of everything. So it actually is appropriate to handle how you will have the convention in Houston before you talk about whether you would consider changing it.
I respectfully disagree, but I understand.
Sure. Thank you very much. And so it is, let's see, help to see if they're addressing the current amendment on the floor to add a requirement for provision of a doctor's note of some sort. Ms. Starnes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dion Starnes, SD30. I just have a point of inquiry. Since they are duly elected delegates, can we deny them access if they do not wear a mask?
That is an excellent question, and I'm looking forward to seeing how anyone handles that in the polling places. And we've had some fairly extensive conversations about it with the staff as well. Mr. Bergsman.
Call the question.
Oh, sorry, but actually, Ms. Glover's already done that. Oh, you're calling the question on the amendment.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay. So we have a call to question on the amendment. Is there a second for the call to question?
Second.
Okay. There's a second for the call to question. It's non-debatable. All in favor? Oh, well, sorry. The last hand that was up. Did I already ask Ms. Elliott whether you have anything on this motion? Yeah, I did. You don't. Okay. All in favor of calling the question on the amendment, please click the little yes button. All opposed, please click the little no button.
Calling the question.
The question is to call the question on the amendment. So to have the vote on the amendment to add the doctor note requirement to the provision of the requirements under which masks are and are not required.
Forgive me, Chairman, where do we vote?
If you click on the participant button at the bottom of your screen, a participant window will come up on the right. It'll show names, and at the bottom of them, there's a little yes and no indicator. Okay, I'm going to close the vote in 3, 2, 1. The ayes have it. The question has been called. We are now voting on the amendment. So the amendment, Mrs. Duncan, did you paste it into chat?
Yes.
If not, I will paraphrase it, or if you'd like to repeat it, please.
No, that's okay. You can paraphrase it.
Okay. We are on an amendment to Mr. Ramsey's amended motion. So
Mr. Chairman, I'd like a roll call vote, please.
Okay, so we will have a roll call vote on the amendment to Mr. Ramsey's amended motion. So the motion is the SREC recommends temporary state rules committee to include appropriate supplemental rules to make wearing masks at our in-person convention consistent with the governor's EO GA 29. Mrs. Duncan's amendment is to requiring a doctor's note for medical exemption. And so you are voting on the amendment requiring the doctor's note for a medical exemption. All in favor, actually, this is gonna be a record vote. So Brandon or someone, if you'd go ahead and indicate, or Chris or someone, if you would go ahead and indicate the beginning of the vote on the amendment to add a doctor requirement. Okay, go ahead. Actually, hang on, Mr. Cleed. Let's wait a sec here. I'll go ahead and do it since, okay, vote on amendment to require doctor note for exemption. Okay, so that indicates beginning. Now, if you will enter a no or a yes, and of course, make sure your name's in there right, so that we know what SE and all that you are. Yeah, Ms. Pareda, yes, there is an exception for if you have a medical condition, there is an exception in the governor's order. Mrs. Duncan's amendment is to add that exemption applies if you have a doctor's order present.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, there you go. All right, it appears to me that the nays have it. So the amendment fails. So we are back to the motion as amended. Seeing no new hands raised, I'm going to assume there is no further discussion. So therefore, let's vote on the motion as amended, unless Mr. Nord, is that a new hand raise or is that?
Yes, please. Thank you. I would rise, so to speak against this motion. We don't have rules, supplemental or otherwise, to talk about ancillary things to our group. We don't have a rule that says everybody shall go a reasonable speed as they travel from wherever they are to the meeting. We don't have rules about whether or not we're going to be able to smoke outside the building. We don't have lots of rules like these. That doesn't mean that we are in favor of breaking those rules, or that we should, because this becomes the new vogue thing, that we should get involved in continuing to say, oh, and by the way, the governor's made a new law. Not that he should be doing that, but irrespective of that, and however you feel about that, it's just a new rule or a new law. Even if you accept it, that doesn't mean we should have a supplemental rule about it. I'll be voting against this, and I would urge my colleagues to join me.
Thanks. So I would ask for continued patience and grace from everyone as we continue to work through the parliamentary procedure, and we balance that with courtesy on this platform. So thank you for your comment. Any further discussion for or against the motion as amended? I see. So Mr. Armstrong's been on for a while, but I think you didn't want to speak to the amendment. Are you waiting to the next agenda item?
Correct.
Wonderful. Ms. Elliott, same.
I don't want to speak on this issue, but I have another issue regarding how to conduct this convention.
Great. Mr. Armstrong will be first up for that, and you'll be next. Mr. Ramsey.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members, I would just, while I sympathize enormously with what Warren just said, I'll be voting for this. I made the motion. To me, this is one of these things that 2 or 3 days ago, we had 3 major obstacles to an in-person convention. One was the Harris County judge, one was the Houston mayor, and the third was potential interference from our own governor. And at this point, we've essentially been given the green light, a very narrow green light, by all 3 of those individuals to go ahead and hold the convention. I think this would give reassurance to everyone planning on attending that we do intend to conduct this convention in the safest manner possible. And it is not our intent to start a 60,000 person demonstration style additional bump in the COVID cases. I don't see this as Mr. Warren does on like a speed limit. In part because we've had speed limits as long as I've been alive. We have not had mask instructions as long as I've been alive. We do. I'm not in favor of mandatory masks. Don't get me wrong. I'm very much opposed to making them absolutely mandatory. But in some situations, they are helpful in letting us get about our business, whether it's work, whether it's personal things, whether it's church, whether it's holding a largest convention in the world. And so I would encourage the members to vote for this. This is not an infringement, a giving up of a massive amount of liberty. This is simply acknowledging that we are diligently trying to hold this in the safest possible manner. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Seeing, well, Mr. Branch.
I was going to on another item.
Okay, great. Then, seeing no further discussion, we are voting on the motion as amended, which has the 1 vote change. So again, let me find that. And actually, Mr. Ramsey, if you'll repaste your motion into the window, please, as last amended with that 1 word change. you would mind doing that, we'll begin the vote as soon as you do that. There we go. All right. If you would please, everyone, vote. Yes, actually, yeah. Let's vote yes or no using the yes or no indicators. Voting has begun. I see that there. If we go ahead and do that, we are at about 40. We're about 40 votes so far up in the yes and no buttons. We're doing the yes and no buttons. So far, the yes and no buttons. Okay, we're at about 50.
Watching from beginning to end, I guarantee you.
You're unmuted. There we go. We're over 50, and we will close voting in 3, 2. It's hard to see. I've got some people who are indicating their votes in the chat room, in the chat window. Please don't do that on this vote. It's not a record vote. Please do it on the yes and no indicators. 53 of you have indicated your preferences so far. We got about 10 more. So I'm going to close voting using the yes and no check boxes, the yes and no indicators.
Did you see my post just minutes ago?
I see 56, 57, 58. Great. Okay. The motion fails. So that motion fails, and now we're on to Mr. Robinson. Sorry, no. Yeah, Mr. Armstrong.
Hey guys, sorry. I'm gonna go to a little quieter place. I'm actually in the hospital right now. So one thing I wanted to mention in regards to, no, I'm good. One thing I wanted to mention just about this convention and everything, just kind of give you a snapshot of where we are right now. I'm gonna turn my stuff on right here. I'm in the hospital, so I have my mask on. So I'm actually finishing up rounding right now. There's lots of COVID around here. So guys, so what's happening in Texas right now, and I think we kind of know what's happening, is just it's been a significant increase in the cases. Certainly, it's been an increase in the rate of increase as well. And I think that that's what's concerning everybody. I know in the pandemic in 1918, we had the second wave was actually one that was the most concerning wave because it really hit pretty hard. And that the virulence of the virus at that time, a century ago, was actually much more dangerous. And it was just a lot more deadly. And I think that's the history that people are coming into this with, from around the middle of April all the way till around middle of June, we were seeing kind of a flattening of the number of cases. And this was a number of percentages. And so this was not, the fact that the numbers of cases have increased was not only related to the increased number of tests that we were doing, but it was also the percentage was higher as well. And Abbott had said pretty consistently that if the rate of increase got any higher than 10%, then we would have to shut things down again. And that's essentially what happened and what we saw in the middle of June, which is why he started doing that. I'm not giving you whether I agree with that or not. I'm just saying that he's been pretty consistent with saying that. And in Harris County in particular, that's where we've seen the greatest growth. The greatest number of cases. The mortality rate is around 1.1% in Harris County, and it's actually gone down. I suspect it's going to continue to go down. There's been about 378 deaths in Harris County. In Texas, recently we saw over 8,000 new cases in one day. And that was a significant concern to medical professionals and everybody. And so we're looking at data, but data can certainly be interpreted in many ways. And so I want to give you just an anecdote of what I'm seeing right now in the hospitals, because I'm a hospitalist. I take care of patients in the hospital. So I've taken care of hundreds of COVID-19 patients in the hospital. I've taken care of a lot of patients in the nursing home. I mean, we've used hydroxychloroquine with some success in the nursing homes, and so I think y'all have probably seen some of that in the press. But what I'm seeing now in the hospitals, just anecdotally, is we are seeing a significant increase in patients that are coming in now. It's certainly more younger patients. I've taken care of personal friends in the hospital, including, one of my, former pastors and his family. It's just really been, it's really been very telling that I've seen a lot of personal friends come in just recently. And that's something that I never saw in 2009 with that pandemic. It's not something that is new with this. And so it's affecting a lot of people. And I don't know if y'all are seeing that as well, but what I'm hearing from people is that now they're seeing relatives with it. They're seeing people that they know that are getting COVID-19. Now many of them are not dying from it because they're mostly young people, but they're having illnesses, fevers and chills. And it looks like what's happening with the virus is that it's becoming less virulent, but it's becoming more contagious. And so it's actually spreading a lot easier from person to person, but it's not going to be fatal for most people. Part of that is because it's affecting younger people now, and part of that is because the virus actually is less virulent. The strain is less virulent now. And so that's one thing I'm seeing. Another thing is last week I was on vacation, and my family went on vacation, and we went to we go to this Christian camp for vacation every year. And so we usually vacation with about 25, 26 other families. And so this is a group that is pretty conservative as we are, and we certainly we have devotional times and worship times, and we're in go swimming, do horseback riding and all that. It's a great time. And so we got back last week and this past week actually, and a substantial number of people had gotten ill, just from the week of being there. And that was pretty telling to me. It wasn't a group that was real mindful of the social distancing, wasn't a group that was very mindful of wearing a mask. And so most people were not wearing masks. And so I really, that's a concern of mine that I have, that I just don't want to see a lot of people coming into this convention leaving ill, leaving sick. Like I say, I'm not concerned that it's going to be, we're going to have a lot of fatalities, but certainly that could happen. And so I think it's incumbent upon us and very important that we do everything we can to be as safe as possible. Right now, what masks have shown is that and this has changed. This has changed from the very beginning. I can remember very early on, they were telling us not to wear masks for all these reasons. This is a novel virus, so things have changed. This is really not anything new in science. But now what we have shown over time is that masks tend to protect others from you. And so if you have coronavirus or you have something or the flu or what have you, then what it does, you wearing a mask actually helps protect others from you. It won't necessarily completely protect you, but it is a further barrier. And so, if two people who are interacting are wearing a mask, it actually has more of a protective effect. And so I think that that it's important to wear them, just so that we can make sure that we're coming out of this convention, just in the safest condition. And I think that's going to be essential. That's important to all of us. It's important for the optics of it. It's important for the just the health and safety of our convention goers, because we're going to be all together. We're going to be in a fairly tight space. We're going to try to social distance, but it's very difficult sometimes. So I think wearing a mask, social distancing is something that we can do successfully. This convention is either going to be a model for how to do it, or it's going to be a model for how not to do it. And the entire world is going to be watching this convention and literally the entire world, certainly the RNC is going to be watching to see how things go, because it's going to be a model for how they're going to do it in Jacksonville, Florida in August. And so I think that we can be a great example of how we can successfully, get this thing done. But it's going to take all of our effort, all of us pushing as the leaders of our party, all of us pushing hard to make sure that we're doing everything that and trying to be compliant with what the health officials say. Now, granted, I understand that the health officials have said a lot of things that are not accurate, and, not at all times, but I think that this is something that is important for us to do, and I think it's important for our health, not for for any kind of political reasons at all. And I think coming out of it, actually, I think we'll look better politically if we just be wise. Persons are going to, people are going to, what I'm hearing mostly is people want us to cancel the convention and not have it. I think that, just going through this process tonight, a virtual convention seems extremely difficult and problematic. And so I think at the very least, well, if we're going to have an in-person convention, we got to make sure that we're a model of how to put this thing on safely and how to get this thing going. And so we can be an example for others going forward. And so that's what I would have to share in my personal experience. I mean, I'm at the hospital now. I've been here since like 6 a.m. this morning. And so it is extremely busy right now. And hospitals right now are full. Now hospitals are frequently full. So don't let that be something that's different. It's just, we have extra COVID-19 patients now. And so that's making it more full than it normally is. But I just wanted to share those thoughts with you and just kind of lay that out. And if you guys have any questions, certainly I'm willing to answer.
Dr. Armstrong, Marion Knowlton, SB19, thank you so much for sharing that information with us. I do have a couple of questions for you. One is what's been called mask etiquette, because the places that I go, some people wear masks differently. They're all different kinds of masks. And so how does that affect the efficacy of masks? You're muted, Dr.
So what we're using the mask for predominantly is to prevent people from coughing, sneezing, leaving, what we call fomites, which is just maybe little spittles where the virus particles can live. And so it's not an airborne spread disease. And so tuberculosis is spread airborne. This is not spread airborne. This is droplet. And so basically what typically happens is someone sneezes or coughs or talking or what have you, anything that produces saliva gets on a surface, and then the virus can actually live on that surface for a certain time. Someone touches that surface and then they scratch their face or scratch their eye, and that's how people get infected. What the mask does so this is why you can use just about anything to cover your mouth. What it does is it prevents, those droplet particles from being placed on surfaces. And so that's what's the use of it is for. N95 masks are the type of mask that prevent airborne particles. So it actually prevents viruses from going through. The viruses are not airborne for any length of time. They can be airborne, but they quickly fall out. And so it's mostly droplet. And so what the masks do is they prevent, you from producing particles that can be placed off on different surfaces.
Thank you very much, Dr. Armstrong. And with that, actually, we have, without objection, we'll move on to the agenda item on location. That's a good segue to that. So thank you very much, Dr. Armstrong, for all your service and your care of everyone. The first one up, we are, excuse me, we're doing agenda items on location. Mr. Branch, do you have a motion on location?
Can I still talk?
Oh, yes, your hand had dropped down.
It came down when I cast the vote and I didn't realize it.
you were the next one up, so yes.
Yeah,
Joe
because
Mazzelli, you have the floor.
right. Right now, with the plan, there's plans for social distancing, lots and lots of space, temperature checks, the whole 9 yards. The one thing that those measures do not address are how most people who have COVID-19 do not have symptoms, but they can be transmitting it. I have been in touch with local people who have access to the antibody test and the PCR test. They can do the testing really inexpensively. They're not trying to make any money. They're just trying to help us out so we can have a very safe convention. The antibody test would have to be done each night, and it's $20 each test, or $50 for all 3 days. Or you can do a PCR test, and one test would cover you for the whole convention. That's a little bit more expensive, but it's something that can be done really quickly, relatively inexpensively. And if you test negative, you're not contagious, and we know that. So I would make a motion that we require testing, and we only allow delegates in who test negative.
What a load of horse shit.
I am, take a look. It is my expectation that is, such a requirement would be out of order. I would certainly strongly provide that information. So please provide that information to Brandon. We will follow up and see about making that available to everyone. But I would expect that we would be on very dangerous territory to say that the delegates would not be allowed to vote without participating in that additional step. We will take a look at that. Thank you. Please keep that info to Brandon.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Branch was next up. Sorry. Mr. Branch, do you have anything on location?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't know if this is a time, if I'm out of order or not, but my question, I do have a point of information, then I do have a suggestion, would be a motion as well. What challenges do we find that we could do a virtual or a hybrid type of a convention?
So actually what would be in order here, you all have called the convention for taking place in Houston.
Okay.
So what would be in order would be for you to make a motion for a different location for the convention, and then we can debate and or amend that motion.
Okay, so there, and the last item was at the time to talk about the opportunity for any type of virtual or actually a hybrid. Still
No,
keeping.
that's right now. That's location.
Mr.
So
Chairman?
if you have a preference of location being online or something else over the current plan, which is in person in Houston, then by all means, go ahead and make a motion now.
Mr. Chairman, since that was my motion earlier, may I go ahead and make that at this time?
So,
Mr. Chairman, you said that unless there was objection, you would move to the second agenda item. I do have an objection, and I've been trying to make it.
Okay.
And I apologize.
That's all right. That's that is this all is the challenge of dealing with virtual meetings. So,
I understand. Yes. I'd like to make a motion, if I may, pertaining to the first agenda item, and that is, since masks are required under the governor's order, and since we recognize the necessity of that, we as a party expend funds to provide masks for everybody entering the convention hall.
And I'm going to call that out of order because we've already received donations of thousands of masks, so we already have enough for everyone who will attend.
Okay.
Question.
Great idea. The mask for everybody. We have that. Yes.
I have a question. This is Pastor Broden. Can you hear me?
Yes, but actually, unless it's a point of order, I need you to do the raise hand thing and so that we can take people in order.
Okay, I raised the hand.
Great, and I'll get to you in order. Branch is do you have your motion, Mr. Branch?
Yes,
You
sir.
have the floor.
So first of all, I do want to speak to it, and then I'll make the motion. I did.
Actually, if you would do it the other way around, if you would make the motion,
Yes, sir.
so that we can see if it gets a second, and then you can speak to your motion.
Yes, sir. Okay. So I'm in favor of continuing on with the in-person in Houston alongside holding a virtual for those who are unable to make it. So my motion would be to continue on with an in-person in Houston for those who can make it to Houston and those who are unable to due to health or any other kinds of challenges that are not able to make it, that we have a virtual as well.
Okay, so we're going to pause here.
Okay.
There has been over the months many conversations about some sort of hybrid convention. So to ensure we're talking about the same thing, from a rules perspective, the moment you allow any remote participation, it is an electronic meeting. And Robert's Rules specifically does not discuss rules for an electronic meeting because it inherently restricts the rights of members. For example, a point of order is an incidental motion that takes precedent over pending business and can interrupt another member speaking if the breach in rules requires attention. But in an electronic meeting, as you've all seen here tonight, especially one of 7,000 delegates, the delegates need to be muted or else members couldn't otherwise hear whoever's entitled to the floor. So if you have a convention where some people are in person and others are electronic at home, you create a situation where the delegates in person have inherently different rights than the delegates who are remote. Those in the room could interrupt for a point of order, those remote could not. So if you have a convention with multiple satellite locations, then a member not only has to gain the recognition of the convention chair remotely, the satellite location, but then they have to gain the recognition by the person in charge of the logistics of the satellite with the main location. So each satellite location would then have different rights than the delegates at the other satellite locations. This hurdle exists before you even get to the logistic and technical considerations needed. So it is the opinion of the chair and the parliamentarian and the rules working group we had working on this, that holding a hybrid convention is not permissible, feasible, or desirable. So do you have a different motion? Okay. And now back to Ms. Glover. As you said, you had originally had a motion before you switched to the motion to call the question. So you said you had a motion?
Okay, we are on the second agenda.
Yes, we are. We're on the question of location.
I would like to make a motion that we continue with our plans in Houston.
Great.
Mark Dunham, SD 29 second.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Let me think about that for a second. That actually is the current state is that we've already called the meeting for Houston. So all it takes to still have the meeting in Houston is to vote down any other motion to the contrary. However, what would be in order, Ms. Glover, would be a resolution reinforcing the support for in-person.
Yes, sir. I will make a motion for a resolution supporting our convention in Houston. Whatever it takes to move forward with having it in Houston.
So we have a motion for a resolution to continue with the location in Houston in person. It does have a second for Mr. Dunham. Am I correct about that, Mr. Dunham?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Ms. Glover, would you like to speak to your motion?
I would like to say that my fellow committee man, David Covey, did an excellent job speaking to it earlier. And so I'm going to defer to his wonderful speech. But I would just add that in the spirit of liberty, our delegates, I believe my committee man, David Halverson, and I have received feedback that more of our delegates would prefer to have the convention in Houston. And I think that's true for many of the other SDs. And in the name of liberty, which right now seems to be in a little bit of short supply in our state, I would like to say that I would love to have our convention in Houston.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, so would anyone else like to speak on the motion? Please raise your hand, and I'm going to take people in order. Mr. Branch, you were up front. Did you want to speak on the motion? For or against?
Yeah, I'm for in person, obviously, because I want people to be heard. I just think it's really unfortunate that we don't have a system or a way. And I understand about the parliamentarian. I understand about Robert's rules. I think part of that is subjective, though, to where we should have been able to have a chance for those who are not able to attend to at least have the opportunity to also be heard as well. I'm going to put that in because you'll have about 40 to 50% that will not be able to attend for this. So that's my comments on that. And I'm hoping that we can move, a little bit more to the 2020s and be able to provide some way to be able to accommodate everybody, to give everybody that same opportunity. So that's all I'd say.
Mr. Chairman, Mrs. Stanko, Ms. Stanko has a point of inquiry. So, Ms. Stanko, you have the floor. Well, you have the floor if you can unmute and click.
Oops, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman. Regarding your ruling that you just gave a few minutes ago,
Yes.
does that apply to only the General Assembly, or does it also apply to the caucuses and the committee meetings?
Same. You have all of the same issues. And in fact, caucuses and committee meetings, the caucuses in particular, you also have an obscene amount of logistic challenges. As we all saw, and as I said at the opening, it took weeks for us to be able to arrange for all of our county and SD conventions. And while that was 200 and we'd only be talking 60, it's still 60 and we now have 2 weeks. So that it still would apply to that as well. So that's your point of inquiry.
Thank you.
The next one with the hand raised was Mr. McCloskey. Are you speaking on or, yeah, sorry, to Mr. Rain's comment, or sorry, was it? Yeah, sorry. Anyway, to the comment that we just had, we will be live streaming, Mr. Branch, yeah, sorry. We will be live streaming the convention and committee meetings just like we did at the last convention. So and the committees can adopt rules to hear from anyone they want, including people to testify remotely if that's what they want to do to help them conduct their business. So they can do that. And we are very much, in fact, we live streamed all our meetings. The Democrats bragged about live streaming their convention this year. We live streamed all of it 2 years ago. That's not new. Okay, so now to Mr. McCloskey, are you speaking for or against this motion, or did you have a different emotion?
Well, I have a different motion if we get to it, but I wish to speak against this motion. Okay. There's been discussion earlier tonight about that people would be disenfranchised if we were to hold a virtual meeting. Well, more people are being disenfranchised by us holding an in-person meeting. What percentage of our delegates who are on the list are not going? It is something approaching 50%. If anything, by doing at least some of our business virtually, we will add people, not subtract. The reason why I asked the question earlier about our deadlines for choosing national convention delegates and choosing our electors is we still have 2 weeks to go yet. And there's a possibility that between now and 2 weeks from now, that some authority will not allow us to meet. And if we get there, we get to that week, we will not have enough time to choose national convention delegates if we have to choose them by July 20th. We could run the situation where I believe we were told when we were voting on the rules changes that we made early in the year that we could have as few as 9 national convention delegates if we didn't do certain things.
Actually, it would be worse than that. But Mr. McCloskey, that's why I said in the opening that regardless, that you all will make your decision tonight. Your decision tonight will decide which rules changes I will notice tomorrow for our meeting on Sunday. It is not a question of if we will have rule changes. We will have rule changes because to accommodate what could be a potential order coming down, we need to still have rule changes to allow for our contingency plan to be triggered. So tomorrow that will be noticed. The question in the meeting tonight is what we do. So if the motion on the floor is passed, then we already have from the rules working group the recommendations, just like the rules you all passed to allow Senate district and county conventions to go online if necessary, which I don't believe any of them did, but they could have. We will be able to if necessary. So we are having our convention and we will have our convention by July 18th. The only question is, will it be in Houston in person or will it be online? And so that, I mean, that is the question before us.
Mr. Chairman, may I finish?
Point of inquiry.
I have the floor if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, actually, you were out of order, so you're out of order.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a point of inquiry as well.
Okay, so Mr. McCloskey, thank you. You were out of order. Now, Mr.
May I complete my debate why I'm against it?
You listed a reason that actually wasn't applicable.
Okay, well, I would like to continue though. The motion, as I understand it, is to maintain a resolution in support of keeping the convention as it is. I'm speaking as to why I feel there are problems with that. And I feel that we need to keep that in mind, even with what you're saying with potential rules changes. You're recognizing, as I understand, Mr. Chairman, that some things may change. And so this resolution, in my opinion, is contrary to what you're saying may happen on Sunday. And so I feel this resolution is inconsistent with that. And so I'm going to be voting against it. I recommend voting against it.
Thank you. So in order right now with hands raised, Mr. DeRazio, Mr. Bergsman, Mr. Dalton, Mr. Morales, Mr. Rain, Stanner,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Robertson, and yes, Mr. Rain, Mr. Rain was the first to say, you said you were speaking against and had a motion to amend, but you are seventh in line. Sorry.
But I also have a point of inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
If I may, Michael Rain, E26. You mentioned contingency plans. May I ask what those contingency plans are?
Yeah, they are, as we discussed on Tuesday night and as we have discussed on other meetings, it is to have an online convention. That is the contingency plan.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
And I can keep my hand raised for speaking again.
All right, Mrs. Stanko, I think we already got yours. Dion Starnes, you have a point of inquiry.
Yes, sir. If we vote to continue on in person, the contingency plans will be laid out for us, I assume, like what would be the order, what is the platform that we're doing, that anything that you're doing to get that platform ready. All of that will continue and we will be notified of what all that is?
Well, as with an in-person convention, the responsibility of conducting the convention is staff's responsibility. Staff, as you know, has relied heavily on you and a lot of other volunteers for the in-person convention. They have relied on others for the virtual convention, and so. You all will be welcome as we talk about what the details are. You'll be welcome to ask questions, just as anybody's welcome to ask Kyle you know, which ballroom the lunch is in. But that is a thing we'll be doing. So back to this debate, which is on Ms. Lover's resolution to continue with the plan for Houston in-person convention. We had, let me double check if there are further points of inquiry. Mr. Morale, no, sorry, I'll get to your hands raised in order. Okay, so, all right, now to those hands raised in order. Mr. DeRazio, you're next up.
Man, I'm excited. I get to speak. Whenever we did the SD convention here in San Antonio, we took all the precautions necessary. We're the Republican Party, and we're the party of personal responsibility. I'm not in favor of putting any rules on anybody, but we do give them the opportunity that if they're concerned about you know, wearing a face mask, you know, we don't discourage it. People that don't want to wear one, you know, we don't discourage that either. And the people here have respected each other. They've respected the delegation. It's pretty interesting. I took a look at the people in Houston. There's 4,664,160 people. Of that, the last numbers I have are 31,422 cases of COVID. Now, if you do the percentages, that is 0.7%, which means 99.3% of the people in Houston are COVID free. So with those kind of numbers, and with giving people the freedom to be able to respect each other, I don't think we need any rules. But I'm in favor of this resolution because we want to encourage people to respect each other, but we don't want to put a burden on them that they can't carry, because we have too many rules already. If we just explain it, we're going to do it. In our SD convention, we found that when we over communicated, and that was what I learned from the chairman with our delegation, that they heard us. Not a single one of our delegates have not received some of our communication of how we were going to do things. We had a nice lady out there who was taking the temperatures to the people who wanted it. Only 3 people of the entire convention refused to have their temperature taken. So they're responsible. The people are responsible, and we just let them do it. Every time that we've given them the opportunity, they've done it. Every time, and they've done it right, and they've voted right, and it worked out well for us. And so I'm in favor of what we want to do here and have the convention. I'm in favor of allowing our delegates the freedom to participate, and allow them the freedom to be responsible with our fellow delegates. That's what we're about. We don't want any more rules, and we got too many in this country already. But that's what I wanted to say. I'm in favor of this resolution.
Thank you, Mr. DeRazio. Mr. Bergsma.
Yeah, my turn.
And then Mr. Dalton and Mr. Morales are the next two up. Mr. Bergsma.
Okay, I speak against the motion. It's my opinion that we have an avalanche of things going on that will compel us, if we're going to have a convention at all, to do it online, do a virtual convention. Already in our delegation in SD20, Nueces County and SD20, well over half our delegates have decided not to attend, partly on concerns about coronavirus. And I myself just got over having a respiratory infection with pneumonia. And if I caught COVID, it'd plant me, and mask or no mask. And it's my opinion that a responsible opportunity for the party, we need to recognize the risk. This is a real risk, it's a real disease. It's not a cartoon. And that a lot of people will be put at risk by holding this convention. It will look bad reflection on the party. I think that we need to plan right now to have as effective a virtual convention as we possibly can. It will boost our participation immensely. And we'll be able to have, instead of a very thready, very small convention, which possibly will get sandbagged anyway. The labor unions in the hotels are talking about refusing to support, and in the convention center are already talking about refusing to be involved with the convention at all. We are at real risk of not occurring. So I speak against this motion, and I think we really need to look hard at a virtual convention.
Thanks, sir. Okay, so just so everybody knows, next up is Sam Dalton, then Roy Morales, then Michael Rain, then Gail Stannard, then Randall Dunning, then Tanya Robertson, then Warren Nord, then Morgan Graham, then Walter West, then Barbara Crosco, then Summer Weiss. There's more after that. So if you would keep that in mind, you picture microphones with 15 people at each. Mr. Dalton.
Sam Dalton, Senate District 20. I speak against the motion to hold the convention in Houston. I encourage everybody to think about the law of unintended consequences. Meaning, for example, if someone does get ill due to going to the convention, they bring it back to their home, which is all over the state, and communicate it to others before they realize they're even necessarily sick or have conditions that are observable. Therefore, I speak against holding it and for holding a virtual convention. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Morales, you are up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Roy Morales, SD 13. Ms. Elliott and I did put out an email to our delegates. And what we found was 80% wish to continue in Houston in person. I think that's very important. They do not want to be disenfranchised with a virtual type of convention. That is why I speak for Ms. Glover's resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And we have Mr. Rain. He's on mute right now. Mr. Rain.
Just been muted. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael Rain, SD 26. Listen, I understand the importance of having a live convention. I think it's a wonderful idea and that we should proceed if we can and do it safely within the guidelines that have been established by the governor. But I speak against the current motion as it stands. Mr. Dalton makes a very good and very well reasoned argument against having a live convention, and having polled the folks in my Senate district, we're about equally divided. Some are for it and some are against it, and some are even in favor of a hybrid convention. And therefore, I also rise to make a motion to amend the current motion that we have our general sessions live, and that the Senate district and in congressional district caucuses, where we select delegates to the national convention, where we select our electors, and any other business that is required, that be done virtually through electronic means. And that's the motion that I make, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so that's actually out of order. We've got a motion on the floor. Next up would be Ms. Stannard.
Mr. Chairman, Gail Stannard, SD 15. Virgil Cruz, my counterpart, and I also did a poll, and we were stunned with the amount of people who responded. We sent it only to the delegates and alternates of SD 15. We have an older crowd in general, but we are diversified in lots of ways. We had about a 45% response. That is just phenomenal. Normally we might have 2 or 3 people, and we had almost 70 people to respond, maybe more with the numbers that came in today. 72% said they want us to go ahead with an in-person convention. And they expressed to us in the comments section that this is a liberty issue. And I agree with that. I am very concerned that we are rightfully concerned about the optics and what the news media, what the Democrats are going to say and do to make us look bad if we do hold an in-person convention. On the other hand, I believe that we are at a tipping point of losing the liberties that we have and that is only found in this form of government that was settled back in 1770s and 80s. And I hope that we will choose the right decision, but I think we need to think very seriously in terms of losing our liberties. And this is one place where we can make a stand. And I'm going to have to vote in favor of an in-person convention because that's what my constituents overwhelmingly said that I needed to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Dunning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Randy Dunning, SD 16. I think the biggest optic we need is within our own party. What we need is to demonstrate courage. This has been one problem that we have had. We are perceived as cowardly. We are perceived as being pushed around by the media. We need to stand up for these things. We are Texans. Yes, there is a risk. I don't think the risk is very big. We're not dealing with the plague of Justinian. We're not dealing with the Black Death. We're not even dealing with the 1919. We are dealing with one of the most feeble epidemics ever that has caused more economic damage. Let's not just let it be our economic damage. Let's prevent it from taking our liberties as well. I strongly support the idea of the in-person convention, and I also believe this party should work to legally challenge anything that would try to prevent us, including breach of contract by the hotels, breach of contract by the Assembly Center, or anything that would cause us to not by some elected official that we would gain court injunctions to continue forward. I strongly support this measure.
Thank you, Ms. Robertson, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tanya Robertson, SD 11. Just very quickly, I wanted to share, I also polled our Senate district immediately after our meeting on Tuesday night. And I too was very encouraged and surprised. Over 72% voted to have an in-person convention. And even so far as to say 46% of that 72 was without mandates or PPE, and the other 26 were with. So I'm going to echo, I'm speaking in favor of this resolution and echo Committeewoman Glover's sentiments.
Thank you. And next up is Mr. Norwood.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. I want to address the disenfranchisement. I want to say first, it breaks my heart that we have good people that have attended for decades and won't be able to make it. But that's not because of those immunocompromised people, but because we have a lot of people who are out of work who are now poor suddenly, who were not poor 6 months ago or even not too long ago when we were figuring out who was going to come to this. The money runs out sooner or later, and times are tough. So this does disenfranchise people. But we can't pretend as though it's going to be all roses, as our chair has said. You would have logistics galore. Can you imagine thousands of people trying to check in and get their credentials? People who have never used Zoom. I use Zoom almost daily, and I had to struggle to find a raise hand again today. And so these things are not trivial. And I can tell you, Grayson County, a lot of other counties in the state, good video quality internet is tough. So we're talking about a check-in time that would be a monster. And what happens when somebody leaves? Hello, are you there? I mean, this is just not what it turns into. Is a management performance with a few people that know what they're doing, raising their hand at the appropriate time, trying to maintain some sort of semblance of form. This is really just not all for show. So as much as I hate the fact that we're disenfranchised and some people that can't make it, we have to go forward. But I will say we can also minimize the disenfranchisement if we said, let's make our big meetings, and I know that some of this is kind of has to be done this way, at the beginning and at the end. And so let's say the second day is the CD meetings where we do what I consider the most important work of getting our nominations to national and getting our electors done. So that's day number 2. So the people who are compromised could come in, they could just do one day and they can escape. They've participated just like they have for 20 years. They wore the mask the whole time. We all act like reasonable human beings and don't say just because it's my body, my face, my mask, I don't have the right to do it. I don't have any problem putting a mask on for my friends who want me to wear one. We can do that. So let's go ahead and have our physical convention, and then let's pack the important meetings into one day. Those are all caucus meetings. They can be in big rooms, lots of spacing, and it will all work out. And if we do wind up this failing, and we should take as an alternative Fort Worth, where I am told that we can take care of this party. Thank you.
Thank you. And next up is Mrs. Graham.
Hi, Morgan Graham, SD 27, and I'm speaking against the motion for several reasons. I came into this very much on the fence and hoping to hear the arguments both for and against, as well as the most up-to-date information. Now, I've heard some very compelling reasons to go ahead and proceed in Houston, but then I've been presented with reality and current things that pretty much make my decision for me. I have received notice from several of my delegates already that hotels are now canceling their rooms and closing due to COVID-19 concerns. They have no place to stay. Many, Warren, you mentioned the economic impact of the horrible decisions made by some of our Democrat leaders, cannot afford many of the rooms that are in the block. So when we talk about potential disenfranchisement and potential numbers, and then we talk about responses to polls, there are realities that are associated with this that are very much real. If hotels close down, those who do not live in Harris County like many SRECs do, I understand Harris County holds how many SDs? I'm just saying there are people that are far closer to the site, and it will be essentially sending the message to all of us who are far flung, and I know it's just the Valley to some of you, but many of us are far flung and unable to do that. Additionally, look at the message that it sends. It will also affect our committee makeup. People who have been economically impacted will not be able to serve as volunteers on committees. That means that people who are financially independent, like myself, as I'm blessed in that way, would be able to, but it would change the type of committees that we have. It would also say that it can very much affect the outcome of those committees as well and the work product. Entirely different paradigm than some of our folks who are still working or who are struggling in those areas. I strongly urge you to vote against this. I think that there are things that we cannot control. We can't sue our way into making sure that this happens when it needs to happen, as it needs to happen. As for those who have limited internet access in various SDs, I noticed that their SRECs are able to attend today. And I might suggest that if we do go with a virtual convention, it shouldn't be too hard to have those delegates in that SD travel a much shorter distance and congregate elsewhere, so that those who do know how to conduct a Zoom meeting and those who do have the ability and the technical know-how to get an adequate speed can do so. We're the Republican Party. We are adaptable. If we were not, we will go the way of the dinosaur. And by sending the message that we can't even handle figuring out the logistics in 2020 of having a virtual convention demonstrates exactly the worst possible thing that we keep denying. And that's that we just aren't evolving fast enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to, let's see, that brings us to Walter West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Walter West, SD4. As the only SREC member who has actually been to the George R. Brown Convention Center within the past 24 hours, if you look at my background, you can see that we actually have a building that's seated for 50,000, and we're going to have only a quarter of that or less. Not to mention the fact that if you also look at the fact that within the realm of what's been going on in Houston, my new background, there's nobody there. The National Guard is sitting in the Hilton Plaza, the Hilton Americas. The hotels are vacant. The hospitality industry, for people to say, I mean, if they've got credible sources saying that these folks and these unions are going to actually come out and poison us or steal our stuff or whatever, that's ridiculous. We are the party of personal liberty, freedom, responsibility. Not to mention the fact we're already in on this thing. We want to, now the argument is, let's try to get to a virtual reality check within the next week and a half. Those are Democrats that are involved in those cities. Sylvester Turner, he actually put out that he's not going to touch the convention. He thinks we can do it responsibly. That's kind of neat coming from a Democrat. Not to mention the fact that the whole reason we're here is because our governor started making these orders. So all these judges and mayors, they're the ones who lined up behind that. Let's show the people of Texas, we are the responsibility of party. We are the greater opportunity party, and let's bring some dadgum capitalism back to Houston. I yield the floor.
Thank you. That brings us to Mrs. Crosco.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Regarding this motion, we did some polling in El Paso, and Mark and I, my counterpart, did, and his was overwhelmingly in person. Mine was neck to neck. Having said that, I've listened to the doctor, I listened to the gentleman with the statistics in Houston, and my question is, does the city council, the county commissioners, the mayor, and the county judge, do they have the ability at the last minute to pull the plug on this? Is that something that we should be concerned about, considering we know they're a Democratic city? And then I was reading the letter from, well, doing some research, and I noticed that the Texas Medical Association has sent a letter to the RPT requesting that we not have the convention. And their reasoning was medical reasons, COVID. I mean, they made some very logical points there. So are we taking into consideration whether or not the city and the county can, like I said, pull the plug on us at the last minute and then we have nowhere to go? Or is that a consideration? I don't know how the city council and the county commission would say, no, you can't have a convention in Houston. Does anybody know?
We could conceivably have a government order at any time. That's why we have been prepared with a contingency plan. That's why, as the risk of that happening seems to have escalated fairly significantly in the last week, and as some of the members of this committee asked us to go ahead and take steps to implement potentially the preparation, that is to move up to that is why we are having these conversations. That is why tomorrow there will be a rule notification, no matter what is decided tonight, because we must be prepared to deal with that if we should. So Thank you very much for that. Appreciate that. Mrs. Wise. Yeah.
Summer Wise, SD 24. I'd call the question.
Okay, let me, give me just.
Mr. Chairman, this is Susan Wright, SD10. I have been waiting for quite a while to speak, please.
I can withdraw it if
Got
that's an
about
option.
7 people who are, but it is, actually, we've got about 12 people who are. It is, we have had a decent amount of discussion though, and so give me just a second, if you will.
We can.
Okay, so if you do not want to end discussion for any reason, including that you would be next up and in fact you were just 2 away, then you would vote against this motion. So yeah, the motion to call the question, is there a second to call the question?
Second.
Requires 2/3 call the question, to be clear. So there's a motion. Is there any debate on calling the question? Is it debatable for calling the question?
No.
I didn't think so. Okay, then, so it's a non-debatable motion. It requires 2/3. We are going to go with counters because I need a count, so an easy count. So everybody please use your green check mark or your red X. Yes to call the question, no to not call the question. It takes 2/3 yes to call the question. So please mark the green yes check or the red X to call the question. You got about half the votes in.
So when we vote, this takes our hand down. Am I going to lose my place again?
Does it?
It did last time. That's how I got so far back in the line.
Yes, it does put her hand down.
Crap. Okay, well, I don't want to do that. All right, I tell you what, we'll let everybody else vote and then I'll go down the line of people whose hands are up and I will ask you yes or no. So if you do not have your hand up, if you have your hand up, don't do anything. Keep your hand up so you stay in the proper order. If you do not have your hand up, make sure you check the yes or the no. Okay, we're showing 40 votes. I'm losing about 20 here. So Marvin, you would vote oh, I see you got an extra vote. All right, so Leslie, you can, okay, so Leslie's a no. Marvin, how do you want to vote? The proxy, how do you want to vote the proxy? Yes for a proxy. Okay, so we got a yes and a no. Those count out. Mark, what was your vote? Yes or no? Mark, your vote, yes or no? Okay, and let's run down the list. Susan, what's yours?
My vote is no.
Okay, Dawn?
No.
Ann?
No.
Okay, Drew? Drew, let me unmute you here. Drew Alert, what's your yes or no on calling the question?
No.
Okay. Leslie, you already said yours was a no. Okay, David?
No.
Okay, Steve?
No.
Okay, Mr. Ramsey, I think you said no. Okay, so the motion does not get the necessary 2/3, therefore it does not pass. And we are continuing with Susan Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief as possible. I rise to speak in opposition to this. I agree with many of my colleagues' comments. Committeewoman Graham particularly made some poignant and very pertinent comments in regards to the current situation, in that a number of our delegates who were in a position to attend now cannot. but for me, this is a little bit different. My committee man and I also polled our district. We had about a 30% return. We were almost evenly split on having it in person versus virtually, but the virtual was ahead. But let me tell you why I oppose this. I look at what our goal is here. There's a lot of political pieces in motion, and we have our own responsibility. Dr. Armstrong was correct. The eyes of the world are upon us, and it is up to us to rise to the moment. And what are we supposed to do? We can make a lot of political statements, and everything we do is going to make a political statement. But in the end, our position is to conduct some business. We have business that must be conducted. And in my assessment of all of this, I've spoken with many of you on the phone in the last few days. I would like to include as many of our delegates as possible in conducting our business. And if we do this in person, we lose a lot of them. For one thing, Senate 10 has about half of the delegation that we're allotted because so many of our people don't feel like they can go because of health risks and, frankly, protest risks and a number of other things. Of those people, we've got more that are falling out because of personal situations, because of other health things, because of financial considerations. So we're disenfranchising, if you will, those people. But more than whatever terminology we use, we're losing the voices of our delegates who are working very hard to be a part of this process. The other thing that concerns me greatly is we have very, very little runway between here and the convention and then our deadline to the RNC. The longer we wait to decide what we're going to do, in other words, if we decide to continue to go to Houston, which I certainly respect, if there is a last minute change, we have even less time to make preparations. Should we decide tonight to go ahead and make our own contingency plans, enact those plans, we control our own situation. We're not at the whims of anyone else. I get all the arguments for liberty. I completely get them, and I'm with you. But this has to be done. These administrative or I'm trying to think of the right word here. We have work that has to be done, and we have to get it done somehow or another. And I would prefer to do it with as many voices as possible than as few voices as dare to go. So I urge my colleagues to join me, vote for all of our delegates, and vote against this motion, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Rain, you said in the comments that you have a point of information.
The vote on this particular motion, Mr. Chairman, Michael Rain, SD 26, the vote on this particular motion, is that by a majority vote?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you, Ms. Wright. That leaves Don Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Don Elliott, SD 13. I want to look at the bigger picture, because if we can't safely hold our convention, then that fact is going to be used to say we can't safely vote in person. And I think that's going to be used to push all mail ballots, which is immensely prone to fraud. So I think there's a bigger picture, and I am very much for an in-person convention. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you. And decorum, please. Ms. Gebhardt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Ann Gebhardt, SD9. I just wanted to share the results of our poll as well. With over 215 delegates we sent our response out to, we received feedback from over 60% of them, and which is quite a lot. And I'd say about 80% of them have said that they want a virtual or hybrid, which I understand hybrid is no longer on the table, which is unfortunate. But in person for the majority of our people up here in SD9, it's really not a good option for them. So I'm speaking, I would encourage everyone to please vote against this. And Mr. Chairman, if it's in order, could I just ask if there might be, it's only because my husband was on that committee, when we might be able to see the results of the committee, the decision that they made as far as the company that they chose. It was not just Zoom. They actually considered some other things. And
Yeah, no, in fact, they recommended an excellent vendor. We've contracted, as I said at the top of this, we've already contracted with that vendor. We've already begun development work to customize front end of it so that it would be easier and controllable and meet our specific needs. That was one of the reasons we went with those. We will talk about all of that after we know what the decision is, or as we are talking about contingency plans. But first, the motion on the table is for the decision. So thank you very much. Mr. Bullard.
Yes, I just want to give the results of my SD. I'm not going to go into the arguments. I mean, I think I see arguments for both sides, but our SD came in on the side of virtual versus, which was 59%, 41% in person, and many people would not be attending. And I think that our constituency will be much better represented with a virtual meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. That leaves Mrs. Thomas. Ms. Thomas?
Yes, I'm unmuting and now I'm turning on the video. And there I am. Hi. I'm gonna, I read the Houston Chronicle, the article that they put out about the convention, and it said that the mayor has the authority to cancel the convention, but that it in the contract with the Republicans that he gave away that authority to the convention. Is that true, that he no longer has authority to cancel the convention, the mayor?
How are you?
This is Wade. I can speak to that.
Hey, Wade.
I don't believe he does have the power to cancel the contract. It does have a force majeure provision in there, just like it did before. But I don't think we're at a situation that would trigger the force majeure. I think he's acknowledged that he can't cancel it. And so short of a governor's order or other type of, executive order, I don't think that can affect our convention going forward in person.
Okay, and my second question is the cost. Should we cancel it, the in-person convention, do we bear the cost of still paying?
Yes.
Well, that's a big question, and the short answer is yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and so with the virtual meetings, my husband's into IT and all this. Haven't talked to him and some others. The guaranteeing security, they said, would be problematic.
So
have you dealt with that?
That's a relevant discussion. If we decide to go virtual, that's not relevant to the resolution on the floor. So
okay, yeah, okay. I also heard that there would be at least 100 police officers there with a SWAT team, that the convention owns the property around the convention center, that it will be locked down, very secure, the garage will be secure, that they'll have
if you would, those are all great questions.
Yeah, but they're relevant to keeping it at the center, that it is safe to be there, that it makes sense to be there. And my last point is that I think this is a convention that Trump wants. He like it or not, Texas is the Republican state. We bear that. So we need to stand our ground. Our forefathers were called on to do much more than wear a mask and go to Houston and take some votes. I think we'll be safe. I think many of us are Christians. We'll put on the armor of God and we'll go do our duty. And we will set the tone for the rest of the states, and we'll set the tone for the convention, the national convention. I think we need to stay strong. That's my
Amen. Amen.
And brings us to David Halverson. As soon as you're unmuted, Mr. Halverson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, we have, as Jill alluded to earlier, my counterpart in SD 12, that our poll is a significant number for in-person convention over virtual convention. And because of the way the rules are set up currently, the best result for our finished product, in my estimation, is going to be a convention in person. So I'm going to support the resolution. I hope my colleagues will do so as well. I agree that there are things to be considered, but also we're going to have to wear a mask. You wear a mask to Walmart, you wear a mask to go out to eat, you wear a mask anywhere you go these days. So wearing a mask should not be a problem for anyone here. I realize it's a liberty issue for some of you, but I mean, you have to go to the grocery store just like everybody else, and you end up having to wear a mask. So my concern here is making sure that we have a convention. We could virtually, there's no guarantees. There's no guarantees that that a virtual convention will go as planned. We can see that in the meetings that we have here. We couldn't even get the screenshot off. So I want to encourage my friends and my colleagues to vote for the in-person convention tonight and for the resolution.
Thank you very much, sir. That brings us to Mr. Atwell. Mr.
Yes,
Atwell?
yes, there we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to speak against, like Ann said, we had a pretty overwhelming support about, especially for the hybrid plan, but we do not want to disenfranchise our SD at all. Ann and I were talking about different scenarios of what we could do if we did something. There have been people saying they're in the rural area and they are not able to do this. We're worked out a deal where we could, or a plan where we could go to where we had our SD convention in my church and have kind of an internet cafe set up for those who are not technologically prepared for this, providing them with laptops and things like that so they can administer that with somebody technical to help that. The other thing is I understand that there's been quite a few states that have been doing the virtual, and I heard North Carolina has opted out to do a virtual just recently, if I'm not correct. And then also, I'm also concerned about some of the events that I've heard that have been canceled. That's very troubling. And I don't know how that's going to affect us economically, and I don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks on that. We are fiscal conservatives. We need to be considered with the bottom line. My understanding is that the Democrats did this virtual thing, and they actually netted about $2 million, but they are Democrats and they have a tendency to lie. But I would hope that we have the ability to cover our cost and come out united against a common foe. But like I said, I appreciate Ann working real hard on our questionnaire and compiling all that. And it certainly had a lot of time and work and calling people and that. But that's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that brings us to Mr. Ramsey.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'll start by saying we're 2.5 hours into this fundamentally on one question, and I'm tired. I cannot imagine changing horses midstream and jumping to a fully virtual format. And I say that from the standpoint of being on one of the two committees that have actually looked at the enormous difficulties in pulling that off. I'm not saying we could not pull it off, but you are talking about a Herculean amount of work to do that. Now, to my bullet points, and I'll be relatively brief. Most of you have covered most of the things that I had listed. But first, I would underscore that while this is a very serious pandemic, it is not Ebola, and it's not as bad as everybody was fearful 3 or 4 months ago that it would be. There's indications it's even weakening as it goes forward, as almost all viruses do. It's the nature of them being a little bit unstable. We're doing massive amounts of more testing. And if you remember early on in the pandemic, more testing reveals more cases, mostly the ones that are not particularly difficult on those patients. The fatality rates are a little bit difficult to game the system with on the stats. I know that sounds a little sobering, but the fatality rates are actually going down, as Robin mentioned. What's even more important is what's called the excess death rate. And that's very difficult to game, not entirely impossible, but that's very difficult to game. And what that is it's the death rate from all causes, everything, compared to what was expected based on prior years. That is going down in Harris County and in Texas, in the United States, in the entire world, even countries like Sweden that haven't been particularly robust in their preventative measures. Anecdotally, I know this is anecdotal and I look at data, but our SD7 convention, we weren't expecting a great turnout. We got the best turnout we've had in several election cycles. The room, frankly, was a bit crowded. It was hot. It was a very long day after some floor fights, and we ended up with no confirmed positive cases in SD7, in the belly of the beast where the hotspot is. I know some of you, I listened to Virgil, I listened to Tanya, I listened to Gail, and I'm seeing the same thing. My numbers were 89.8% in favor of having it here in Harris County. Right here in the hotspot, the people that see it firsthand want to go to convention. We have the firsthand knowledge that the media is exaggerating this. And those of you that are not here in Harris County don't have that benefit we do of actually having the data on the ground. It's wreaking serious economic damage, this whole shutdown scenario. Some say fatal economic damage to businesses, to whole economies, to whole subcultures. And I would add, including actual deaths. You can't pull one string without another string somehow getting affected. And yeah, we might potentially be helping on the COVID side, but what are we losing on the other side? And again, you look at those excess death rates, and that says a lot. I'll move on. I'm tired, but we're serious about our in-person conventions. I haven't heard very many people actually talk about what we get out of those in-person conventions. You know, they're tradition, first of all. There's a lot to be said for tradition. Yeah, we've got some required items. Could we come up with some crazy way of doing the check boxes? Of course we could. I mean, we're flexible people. We could come up with something, probably even get RNC approval for it. But this is not about check boxes. It's about seeing old friends. It's about meeting new friends. It's about meeting candidates, maybe for the first time. I'll never forget the first time I met Robin Armstrong on the floor of a convention. Just bumped into him. I was brand new. I think it was one of my first conventions, and wow, I got to talk to him. I got to get to know him a little bit, a friendship that's kind of flourished over the years. You have one-on-one conversations with these people. You have one-on-one conversations with the people sitting next to you and around you and in caucus meetings. And then you go to another caucus, the CD caucus, and repeat the process over again. It's an enormous boost to the spirit of going forward to November. You look at how the platform gets decided, the legislative priorities, that whole process where people get to come up and talk about their pet issue, raw milk, whatever it happens to be, you completely lose in a virtual setting. There's no way imaginable you have that kind of access to the committees in a virtual setting. I say virtual is virtually impossible to duplicate. And then we're going back to what I think it was Warren said, that are we entertaining whoever's watching at home enough to where they keep us live streaming, or they go off and do something else in their yard or anything else. We are more serious about our form of government than probably anybody in the world, even other states. It's the best form of government. It's best for business. It's best for religious beliefs. We would never disenfranchise anyone. I've heard several play the disenfranchisement card. I would submit to you that when you look at people walking away from the screen because it's not entertaining enough and the babies are crying in the background and the phone calls are ringing and somebody pulls up in a car and wants to talk, you're disenfranchising people virtually that would be absolutely laser focused at an in-person convention. And therefore you're not only getting rid of their access to everything, you're getting rid of their input to the process, which, as Clint worked for years on, we value that grassroots input to the entire process. Somebody mentioned, I think it was Leslie, the effect on President Trump. We are serious about this being about winning in November. President Trump obviously wants this convention to go forward. He wants the national convention in person. He wants rallies. If we turn our back on that, think about what the news media is going to do. The bravest of all states, home of the Alamo, have just said we're afraid of potentially the next wave of something that at this point, 99% of the people that get it, maybe more, actually survive. The news media will spin that into fear-mongering, which I submit will cause a second wave of economic devastation. And if that happens, frankly, President Trump does not have a chance in November if we have that second wave. I'll close with, we're serious about our lives, our children, our grandchildren, for some of you, our great-grandchildren. On this very day, ironically, in 1776, they passed the Lee Resolution, which is what they were saying was they were going to go forward with the final Declaration of Independence that they adopted 2 days later, of course. But today was the day they actually voted to go forward. It would be highly, I think, hazardous to the cause of freedom for us to basically not stand up to the challenge before us. The SREC, generally speaking, I hate to say this way maybe, but we have no real voting power. All we can do is advise and try to persuade legislators. That's it. I've been on 8 years. We've never had a vote that I could say actually had the potential of changing the country, the state in a major way. We've got no true authority.
Mr. Jermaine, please.
Yes. This vote is highly remarkable. The first in my 8 years, perhaps unique situation where we do have that possibility of changing the outcome of the state, the nation, and maybe even the world. They were a beacon in 1776. Our light's not near as bright and it won't be remembered as long. but I submit that this is the best vote we can possibly take for all of you in the history of your SREC career, past or future, is to support Jill's resolution. Thank you for allowing me.
Thank you. Okay, so we have, and again, please everybody remember, we have Mr. Luther, Mr. Kessig, Allison Winter, Gail Stannert, Jason Ross,
Chairman, I'd like to call the
Wise,
question.
JT Edwards, Marion Knowlton, and Gary Teal. And actually, Gary, I know, got bumped off when he was on an earlier. We have more than gone through all the people that we would have. So I'm going to take privilege and bring up Gary Teal, please. Gary, if you would unmute yourself.
Okay.
There you go.
How's that? Okay. Hey,
you are breaking up.
okay. I wanted to say quickly that I had taken a poll of the chairs in SD 22. I'm voting in favor of an in-person convention because my SREC member who made me a proxy wouldn't have made me a proxy if I hadn't promised to do that. When I spoke to the county chairs, there is McLennan County in our SD 22, and they felt very strongly that we must have a convention that is virtual and doesn't require any travel. The other people I spoke to were equally certain that we must have a convention in person. Chairman Randy Bellamy said that.
Mr. Teal, if I may interrupt, your sound quality is really rough. You might be better off leaving the video off and just speaking audio.
Okay, certainly.
There you go. Now you're all better.
It's the nature of being in the country, and I really respect my colleagues from Travis County who have spoken eloquently and have surveyed their members, and other members here who have said that people are scared to come to Houston. I understand that, but the experience that we're all having here today is proof that I might as well have been not part of the Zoom call because I've been listening the whole time. And this is what's going to happen when we have people who can't go to Houston. They will be able to watch people in Houston having a real convention in real time and being able to interact with each other. The thing that bothers me most as far as trying to envision a virtual convention is that you, Mr. Chairman, have run several of these meetings up until now, and almost everyone on this call has been attending those. And so we have some conventions. I cannot in a million years imagine finding 60 or 70 other people who can chair SD caucuses and congressional caucuses and committees and do anything close to what you've been able to do. And it's hard. It's really, really hard for all of us who are waiting our turn. This is very different, and it's not like being there. The virus has disenfranchised all of us in so many different ways. If we go to Houston, we can't hug each other and we can't sit around all night long in the corner booth, and we probably won't have some of the parties that we would have had. If we were to go to a virtual format, some people will feel like they are left out because of health reasons, but they will be able to communicate with people who are in Houston and probably have a better chance of getting their priorities discussed by relaying those concerns and thoughts on to someone who is in Houston than they would by pressing the raise hand button 50 or 70 times as I have tonight. Thank you very much. I'm sorry about my slow internet speed out here in Whitney, Texas.
Thank you very much. Ms. Stannert says she has a point of inquiry.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to make sure that I understand that once we get through this vote, whether we vote for in-person convention or virtual, that we are still going to have a meeting on Sunday where we're going to consider rules that will accommodate having a virtual convention. Is that correct? Did I misunderstand?
That is correct. That's what I said earlier. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I called a question.
To Mr. Luther, please. Mr. Luther?
Okay, I figured it out. I was going to ask if anybody wanted to put money in my PayPal account for me to be really quick, but I don't think I'll do that now. I just wanted to do what everyone else had done and give my Senate district a voice in this proceeding, and let you know that that I sent out a poll, if you will, to the Senate district delegates. I had 136 responses. 101 of them were in favor of a in-person convention. 35 were against or in favor of a virtual convention. So having said that, I speak in favor of this resolution demonstrating the will of my Senate district. I'd also like to add that to Mr. Ramsey's earlier motion about the masks, I want to say that I absolutely 100% without a doubt detest the idea of having to wear a mask anywhere, for that matter. I detest the idea of having to wear one at the convention. But I will tell you this: in order for us to have a convention that does not completely eviscerate our the party in the media, I think that we all have to do whatever we can there at that convention, if we have it in Houston, to follow every single guidelines that we can follow, including wearing those dang masks, because there's going to be photographs of us standing around with no mask on, right up against each other. It's going to be a free-for-all. And so we have got to understand that we're going to be under a microscope. And I also want to confirm what another of our colleagues, or my colleague, said, and that was, and in fact, it was Dr. Armstrong. We are going to be a model for what is going to happen in Jacksonville. And so if we cannot have this convention, it will likely be a problem for the national convention. But I think that we can have it. We can show the world that we can do it. We can do it in the right way. And so I firmly support the resolution to have a in-person convention. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kessick. Mr. Kessick.
Mr. Chairman, I called a question.
Okay, I'm here. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
You can?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. I wanted to speak for Senate District 1. We had a lot of volunteered opinions, and the opinions were overwhelmingly for a real convention in person. And I just want to say, from a faith standpoint, I think that we're taught that we should have relationships with each other. And I think that really makes a difference when you are with people and you are able to communicate and even debate and argue with people, and they can see you, preferably without a mask on. I think tonight is a good example. This is how many times I've been on this now, and I'm still fumbling around and having a tremendous difficulty. And this is just a really small amount of people. I think we've kind of proven that isn't going to be really very successful at all. I think the other thing that Mr. Dunning said earlier tonight really struck a chord with me, that I would like to see a leadership in our party that stands up for our principles. And instead of worrying about what the press thinks and what the left thinks, and what the photographs are going to look like, why don't we just be ourselves and stand for what we believe in it in our platform? And I think the people of Senate District 1 overwhelmingly are for this, and they want to come to Houston. And for those people who don't make it, they're going to miss out. I think Walter's photograph of the streets in Houston are more real evidence of where this country is right now economically. That's kind of what I do for a living, is the economic stuff. And we have almost 50 million people who have now filed for jobless claims. 50 million people. So I think we should be worried about getting together, doing the right thing, for us to be able to have good debates, for us to be able to work on these committees and get this stuff done. I am for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Winter.
Yes, Allison Winter, SD4. We took a survey in our SD as well, and there was an overwhelming number of people that wanted the in-person too. It was 78%. We only had 11% that wanted like a fully virtual one. I agree with my colleagues that I think it would be very difficult to do and to really have voter integrity. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we have the whole convention to ourselves. So there should be plenty of space to spread out and to create, the distances we need. And I think as far as security, we should be very secure. That's been well taken care of with having the pre-planned security that we will have that is not Harris County law enforcement. It's from other places in the state. Finally, I'd like to say too, that I did the calculations on the rates, the death rates, from an email that I get from our representative, Steve Toth, and it was effective yesterday. In Houston, the death rate is 1.2%. In Greater Houston, it's 1.3%. And in Texas, it's 1.5%. These are very, very low rates. Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to Mr. Ross. Mr. Ross? You are unmuted, but I'm not hearing you. You might check next to your mute unmute button. There's a little up arrow and you can change what source is of your audio input. I tell you what, Mr. Ross, I'll leave you up and you will get a chance to speak. And let's go to Ms. Wise.
So I'm going to lower my hand.
Understood. Thank you. Ms. Knowlton.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chairman. Marion Knowlton, SB19. Just very quickly, I wanted to just give a report from SB19, which runs from West Bear County all the way to El Paso in that district. We had mixed reviews between virtual and in person, but anecdotally, I think that the closer people were to San Antonio, they read things like the San Antonio Express News, which the headlines today said, San Antonio closing parks, areas along the Riverwalk for the weekend. San Antonio drops down hotspot list, but doubling the rate is still the same. So I think a lot of people are influenced by the media. As we know this, we see this. And so as we got farther west, those delegates are saying, hey, we're on for Houston. So I think that Robert Casillas, I'm going to speak for him because we've talked, we're deciding we're going to support this resolution. We need to be the leaders and show the folks out there that we can be safe, we can be responsible, we can show the world that we know how to conduct a convention. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Covey.
My points have been covered, so I will lower my hand.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Rain. Mr. Rain, you're on mute. There we go.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. Michael Rain, SD 26. I'd like to address some practical considerations that not one of my colleagues respectfully have addressed at this point. And that is, how many of y'all have know somebody personally who's been infected by the coronavirus? I'd like to point out, first of all, back in April, I was in the hospital with an emergency appendectomy. And so I had to go into the belly of the beast. I've been there. It's rather surreal. It's not something that you want to experience if you don't have to. I also have a daughter who was infected recently, and I've been on personal quarantine for a couple of weeks. I'm now off personal quarantine. I have tested negative. But the problem is that you don't know who has it and who doesn't have this infection. And it affects everybody. And so this is just a practical consideration. If it's helpful, I will tell my daughter's personal story. She's one of these 20-somethings that went to a bar in Austin and was meeting with some friends, socializing. After school let out. Don't blame the 20-year-olds. They sacrificed their spring break. They sacrificed their Easter break. They sacrificed, in San Antonio at least, they sacrificed their celebration of Fiesta. And then shortly after Memorial Day, when things finally opened up, they were able to get out and complete their classes online, which they never bargained for. And they were able to socialize. And so they went out and they socialized. She went to a bar in Austin that said that they were complying with the governor's guidelines. They weren't. And that's a practical consideration that we need to understand, that while we may have a convention center and facilities that are telling us that they're going to comply with the governor's guidelines, doesn't necessarily mean that they are. This bar was not compliant with governor's guidelines. She met with a bartender whose breath she could feel in her face, and she became infected, along with every single one of her friends that went to that bar that night. I'm talking about personal experience. I think it's a practical consideration. If you know somebody who has been infected, then it changes your perspective. And that is part of the perspective that I bring to this debate. And I want you all to consider that in deciding whether or not we are going to have an in-person convention. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. That brings us to Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. First things first, I want to thank you guys for your leadership. It's a tough time. No joke. It's a tough decision. No joke. You've got elections for a lot of us. We have elections in 2 weeks. We have to represent our districts. Welcome to being an SREC for a lot of our freshmen. Told you guys you had a big decision coming up. The good news, we have a very vibrant and active grassroots army. We do. No doubt about that. I could tell you first and foremost, just to kind of echo Committeewoman Robinson's comments. We've received, I sent out a text poll this morning, and said District 11, it was very tight in the morning. In the afternoon, it leaned towards having an in-person convention. So members, I'll be voting that way today. But let me say this, and I'll be as blunt as I can. Galveston, almost all shut down. No beaches, no fireworks. COVID is real. It's the unseen enemy. Bars are shut down. Restaurants at half capacity. People out of work. Remember this. Look into the cameras, guys. Look into your cameras. The world's watching. What type of message does it send when we have our convention? So when we get together, we need to be mindful of that. We need to be on our P's and Q's. As a final note, I won't go, I could go for hours like Mr. Ramsey, my very dear friend. But first things first. It makes me emotional. I think about a lot of our elderly. Many of them are probably first-time delegates. I remember my first time as a delegate. It was fun. It was fun. It was fun. And now they're going to be disenfranchised. I leave you with one note. At the end of the day, despite everything else, all the arguments that you've heard tonight, do one thing for your people. Vote your district. I'll be voting mine. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I cede the floor. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. That brings us to Mr. Ross. Let's see if we got get the audio going. Mr. Ross. Still difficulty. We'll continue to Mr. Covey.
Yes, sir. Is it appropriate to call the question?
It is. That would require a 2/3 vote unless there is no objection. Is there any objection to calling the question?
I'll second it. Summer Wise.
Okay, it is seconded. Without objection, we will call the question. Okay, so hearing no objection, question is called. And we will now move to the vote on the motion. The motion is to issue a resolution in favor of moving forward with the in-person convention. All in favor, click the yes, the green button.
Chris McDonald, SD6, I'll call for a record vote.
Okay, it requires a vote to have a record vote unless there is no objection. Is there any objection to having a record vote? Okay. Hearing no objection to a record vote, we will have a record vote, which means that will now happen and it's already been marked. Record vote, motion, resolution, continue with convention in Houston in person. Put yes or no in the chat box, and we will have the record of the vote. So yes means a resolution in favor of proceeding with a convention in person in Houston, and no means against the resolution to proceed with a meeting in Houston in person.
Mr. Chairman, can I request that the actual count be announced?
Sure. We've got plenty of time.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
We were calling the question. So are we voting on the motion?
No, this is the vote on the motion. This is a record vote on the motion. The calling the question was no objection, so it was unanimous. So we did call the question. That was unanimous. Now we are on the actual motion, which is to have an in-person convention. So the motion is, a resolution of the SREC supporting its previous decision to hold a convention in Houston. Okay, so let's see. Has everyone recorded their vote? A yes in favor of in-person in Houston, a no opposed to the resolution in favor of an in-person meeting in Houston. Okay, so let's see. So Mr. McCloskey has requested that we count them. So You can all follow along since it's in every one of your chat windows. We have a 1, 2, 4, 1 against, 3, 4, 3 against, 5, 6, 4, 4 against, 7, 4, 5 against, 12, 4, 6 against, 16, 4, 17, 4, 19, 4, 9 against, 22, 4, 10 against, 23, 4, 11 against, 25, 4, 12 against, 26, 4, 13 against, 27, 14, 27, 15, 27, 28, 15, 29, 30, 17, 35, 36, 18, 37, 19, 38, 20, 40 to 20. The motion passes. Okay, that concludes our business for tonight. This being an emergency meeting, no other business is in order for tonight. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman,
I have my hand raised.
That's fine. We were done with the agenda item. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, may I call a point of order?
Move.
So moved.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Everybody second.
Yeah. So we have motion second. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed,
Aye.
say nay.
Aye.
What was the vote total again?
40-30.
40-20. Y'all off.
Aye.
We are adjourning. We will tomorrow issue the call as necessary. Have a good evening.
One moment, please.
Hey folks, just hang on just a minute and we had a little crosstalk there. Give us just a minute.
Hey, Brandon. Brandon.